Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the third and final installment in my little series of love letters of sorts for the Fright Night films. If you've not seen the previous videos, a quick little catch up here. Fright Night is my favorite vampire film, with Jerry Dandridge being my favorite vampire character in fiction in general, and Sarandon's performance of that character and the balance of the cast, handling Tom Holland's material the way that they did in Fright Night made it as such for me. So I wanted to do some more kind of spoiler-filled videos, basically these little love letters just talking about these films, because even the sequel and the remake I hold with really high regard for one reason or another. So for this entry, I'll dive into the 2011 remake of Fright Night, this time around starring the late Anton Yelchin as Charlie, Christopher Mintz-Plasse as Ed, otherwise known as Evil Ed, Toni Collette as Charlie's mother. We got Colin Farrell this time taking on the role of Jerry Dandridge, and the Doctor himself, David Tennant, playing Peter Vincent. So the synopsis for this, of course, is pretty much the same thing as the first film, but we get a few things kind of changed up. One of them, of course, is a location. This is now set just outside of the Las Vegas Strip. This gives us the excuse for, people in the area, are going to be sleeping during the day, working at night. They have some odd jobs out there because of just the nature of Las Vegas. So we get this nice change because we get that explanation of nobody is really going to think differently of somebody if they never see them during the day. Also, another really big change is with Charlie and Ed. So in this version, it's Ed who suspects Jerry of being a vampire by kind of keeping track of some disappearances that have been happening around town. And he's kind of been zeroing in on like the center of where all of that must be coming from, and sees that it's most likely Charlie's neighbor. He's also not quite as mature as Charlie and is kind of holding on to his youth in a way, being a little bit too much into fantasy and the occult in a way that Charlie sees as kind of immature. Charlie's still friends with him, but they've definitely been drifting apart, kind of slipping away a lot more than they did in, the first version of the film. And of course, finally, Peter Vincent. This is one final standout change for it, was that Peter Vincent in this iteration is a Vegas performer with a dark and macabre kind of stage show as an illusionist who dabbles in the occult. But at its core, we are, sticking with Fright Night and not deviating too much while, not being so similar that we would not even have to watch this film, that it'd be kind of pointless. So, as I've said in one way or another in some of the videos that I've done about different remakes, I feel that a remake can be kind of tricky to balance, to try to achieve. Basically, I feel like it needs to be a long enough time since the original that, or maybe that original never really got to build an audience. Give us a reason to actually try this remake, to try to get a new audience into it. If it's too well known, if it was too successful, no matter how long ago it was, the remake's going to be compared to the original way too much, and people are going to question why was it even being remade. I also feel like you need to kind of make it different enough from the original that also makes it worth making, but not so much that it kind of makes no sense to even call it a remake. You want it to be different enough to stand on its own, but not so different that you're not even able to compare it to the original. So for instance, take, the videos they did about Evil Dead 2013 versus Ghostbusters 2016. For me, one of them worked great, and the other, it was just kind of okay, but overall pointless and no big deal if you skipped it in favor of just rewatching the original. This film does pretty good as a remake. And this video kind of serves as a remake review as well. But, keep in mind that that's coming from me, somebody who, holds the original in such high regard that I was still able to go into this one with an open mind and really enjoy it. Because we still get this nice sense of mystery and suspense and danger happening. We get this, these touches on Ed and Charlie kind of drifting apart a little bit more, and one needing to convince the other. We also get a lot of the same beats as the first film, just updated, like the effects where this time around we get some CG to either enhance certain scenes or to just replace them entirely, or to do things that they just couldn't do practically. So we get a little bit more kind of thrown into this. And on top of all that, we get the action and violence and a tad bit of that comedy sprinkled on top, just like we saw in the original. But it's not perfect. My biggest issue, unfortunately, would be Jerry. If I take the direct comparisons to Chris Sarandon out of the picture and just speak about this character and how it was written and portrayed in this film, it comes down to a lack of charm. He's not being smooth. So I felt like Dandridge in the first one, we knew he was bad news, of course. That was given to us early. It was never hidden. It was never questioned. But when he's invited in that first one into Charlie's home by his mother, we see how smooth and charming he's come across, and dangerous because of that. Because it kind of tells us, we know he's dangerous, we know he's up to no good, but we also know that nobody's going to believe us through all that charm, so we really are screwed. So it adds that extra layer of fright to it, not being able to get out of the situation, not being able to convince those that have kind of been charmed by him. But in this portrayal, in my opinion, he's not really coming across that way. He seems sketchy right off the bat, and Charlie's mother just isn't seeing that, and it's ridiculous that she's not. So it doesn't work as well for me. Other than that, there is still something else missing from this film, like the characters or performers more specifically just didn't quite gel the same way. And even now I realize that I haven't even mentioned Amy. She didn't stand out to me, and there doesn't seem to be too much of a reason to go into any detail about the portrayal of that character. It just wasn't really written as well in this one, or didn't come together. Anyways, back to what I was saying. The cast didn't really seem to complement each other or have that same heart as the original. That lack of heart is something brought up about the sequel as well, which I'd put in my previous video, that had come up while tweeting with the director about this. He has this little comment about what he felt about the remake and how, Jerry just isn't charming, but he knows that Colin Farrell is charming and he can do it. And all these actors are more than capable, but just something wasn't in the script or in this production to bring that along. But even with all that little complaint being said, they changed things up enough that they were able to make this film its own thing. They kept with the core of the original. It still got me on board with Charlie, like the Charlie and Ed dynamic. Though not as much as the first film. And of course there's Peter Vincent. So probably the biggest change here that still I was okay with, of course, was being a David Tennant fan, mainly due to Doctor Who. I was excited to see that he was coming into this to take over that Peter Vincent role. And I think he did a really great job. He's still an entertainer, still having these flaws, still being pursued by Charlie as, being seen as like this expert. And he brought some great comedy into it, especially with his partner in it, them just going at each other's throats. I didn't feel like they just kind of plugged him in and just put a little bit of a change on him. I mean, he actually came across really well. Because after all, these days I don't think like horror hosts are quite as popular as they used to be when the original Fright Night came out. So, we get different iterations here and there. We get like some, there's like a few of them still around, but it's just not as popular because people have so many other avenues for entertainment. So I feel like if he was just another horror host again, the audience might not really connect with Peter Vincent quite as much. So make him an occult-inspired illusionist, almost like this Chris Angel kind of qualities kind of thrown in with his style in a way. And that really worked for me. All in all, we do have a very good film here. I feel like a very good remake, not as good as the Evil Dead remake, I would say. But when it comes to remakes, but definitely better than Ghostbusters or RoboCop, or even because even in this one, Chris Sarandon himself even shows up to do a quick little cameo, which is really cool to see. So if I gave that first film a 10 and I gave a sequel an 8.5, this one I'd give like a 7.5. Definitely worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, nope. Don't turn it off yet. This isn't really the end of it. Speaking of checking out the sequel, Fright Night 2, New Blood, was a mistake. But since, it is in the Fright Night world, I finally checked it out. So here's some quick notes, since overall I really didn't enjoy this one, and I'm not recommending that you check this one out. Because most important, Fright Night 2, New Blood is not a sequel. It's, even though it says Part 2, it still has Ed in it. He's still alive. None of these characters have experienced vampires before. Peter Vincent is kind of like this ghost hunter, dude bro kind of guy, and they're on a school trip to Romania for some reason. This is just another remake, only 2 years after the other remake. So I'm not sure why they called it Part 2. If anything, they should have just renamed all of the characters and just called it Fright Night New Blood. Let it just be another entry in the Fright Night series. It doesn't need to be a direct sequel or a remake, just let it be its own thing. And that way I could at least accept it as another movie and just kind of keep it separate from the others. However, even if they did all of that and made it like its own separate vampire movie, it still wouldn't work for me. The story really failed to engage me. Ed, even if not calling him Ed. If they had changed all the characters, he's just more of an asshole in this one. They changed up the lore of Elizabeth Bathory and Vlad the Impaler as being one and the same as Jerry Dandridge, played by Jamie Murray, who I really enjoyed in Warehouse 13 and in Defiance, but here I just don't think she had any good material. And, I don't know if it's really an acting issue or a script issue, but, the story, the setting, the characters, the acting, nothing about this worked for me. I did really appreciate that they tried to change some things up, and there were a handful of cool shots maybe, but it just didn't do it for me. And 45 minutes in, I was ready to quit again, figuring I made it further than my first time 10 years ago. I'd only lasted about 12 minutes or so, but I stuck with it. And the last 20 minutes of this film just felt like the longest in cinematic history. And the thing is, I don't like doing this. I don't like going negative on a film, because I know every film takes a lot of hard work to put together, and get it completed at all is just a miracle. Sometimes things don't work out for one reason or another. It's it could be something with the script, something with studio interference, something about their shooting conditions, something could affect it. But even with that, most films still have their fan base, and in this case, I'm just not one of them. I prefer to talk about films I enjoy and I want to recommend, but this one, I just can't recommend Fright Night 2 New Blood. But anyways, to wrap this one up, to wrap up all three of these videos. First one, definitely my favorite, of course. Great story, cast, pacing, everything. It's all balanced perfectly, in my opinion. Favorite vampire film, favorite vampire character. I've seen it several times and owned several editions, and even owning the soundtrack on vinyl. The second one is great. It's a great follow-up. Not the same as the first, not quite as good. It doesn't really have the heart or gel quite as well, but it is still a lot of fun and more than worth checking out if you can somehow track down a copy of it. Especially it's fun because of that expanded antagonist cast. And this remake, very good. It's a very good remake. Again, not as good as like the Evil Dead remake, I would say, but they made some changes, updated it, and though it didn't really have the heart, and some things about Jerry I didn't really care for, they still presented a nice new version for a new audience while making it different enough that super fan like me can still go to it and enjoy. And Fright Night 2 New Blood, I've seen better film on teeth. So, anyways, that kind of concludes my little series of love letters here for the Fright Night films, of which from here on out I'm only really going to acknowledge the existence of the first three. But what about you? Sound off in the comments. Have you seen all of these, including New Blood? What are your thoughts on the franchise as a whole, especially this remake? And if you were so unfortunate, New Blood, I mean, it's fine if you liked it. I'm sure it does have its fans out there, but it just didn't do it for me. But that's about all that I have for this one. And thanks for coming by and checking out all three of these videos, and for sticking around to the end, as all that stuff really does help out quite a bit. And be sure to do the whole like, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to get notifications for when I put up some new content. And I will see you in the next one.